Hello and welcome to the Casual Cinecast, powered by Cinelinx. My name is Chris, and with me as always is Justin. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very, very, very well. Thank you so much for asking.
Awesome.
I appreciate that you ask me every week.
Yeah, well, I'm always interested in knowing how you're doing, Justin, and it's good to know that you're doing well. And with me as always is Myke. Oh, Myke with a Y. This is actually a different Myke. How are you doing today, Myke with a Y?
I am fantastic, and I guess I gotta let the secret out. We are the same person. This is just the alternate ego.
Of the other Myke?
Yes.
Oh, this is like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing.
Yes, and oddly, I'm the Jekyll.
Oh, boy. We're in
Well,
trouble.
you have. Oh no, they both have Y's in their names, but you've got the K, the Y and the K.
Yes. Yeah, you figured out the anagram, yeah.
Yeah. Well done. But yeah, so we're excited to have Myke on. He is the host of a podcast called Cinemusts. So, Myke, why don't you, I guess, talk a little bit about your podcast, introduce yourself, anything you think people should know about you.
Sure, yeah. Hi, my name's Myke. I host the Cinemusts podcast, as Justin said. And at Cinemusts, what we do is we take, every 2 weeks, we do a new episode. We take 2 movies included in the book, 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. We pair them up, and basically we debate if we think they really deserve to be considered absolute must-see movies. And after the episode's over, it's actually not on us to make that final decision. We turn it over to listeners. We have a poll on our website that runs for 2 weeks until the next episode, and listeners are the ones who decide if either, both, or neither of the movies that we covered get onto that list of essential cinema. So it's a ton of fun. I have a rotating guest. Justin, you've been on the show. Chris, I hope to have you on very soon. It's always a really fun time, and we love getting everybody's opinions on these movies and their votes to decide if they're going to be considered must-sees.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to be on. And I love listening to the show. It's definitely a recommendation to everybody listening. If you like our show, go check Cinemusts out.
Thank you.
Yeah, and what was your website? You mentioned that you have a website where people can vote.
It's just cinemusts.com. We spell it Cinemusts. And that's basically how you can find us wherever. So if you're on social media, whatever platform you are there, look for Cinemusts. Just Google it. We should be the only name associated with Cinemusts.
Nice. Well, I guess we should also say that the usual Myke that is here is not here because he's off on some boat cruising it up.
Yeah.
So good for him, I guess. I don't know who's missing out more, you know.
Right.
We're very happy for his success.
What's funny is he's been texting us about how he's watched Game of Thrones while he's on the boat. So I find that very hilarious. And like the theater that's on the boat too, they have like a AMC IMAX on the boat. So I find that very interesting that you go on a cruise and you go see movies and watch TV still.
Because his life isn't that different.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if this is your first time joining us, we like to start every episode by talking about what's on our minds, which is usually the media we've been watching. And then we move into a feature-length review. This week we'll be reviewing Claire Denis' High Life, starring Robert Pattinson, Juliette, Binoche, some other people.
Right. And don't forget that each month we review a film from the Criterion Collection, which is voted on by you, the listeners. So go check out our latest episode. It's on Safety Last. And then look forward to our new film, Stalker, which was Justin's pick, and this is his 3rd month in a row to win. So, guys, we got to do something about that.
Myke, you're not normally part of the poll, but I don't know. Maybe you can like sneak some advice on the side to Chris or Myke on how to pick better movies that'll win polls.
Yeah. I do that on the side. I run a little business of beating Justin in these sorts of things. So if you guys can consult me, I charge only a very nominal fee. I think I can get you some winners.
Awesome. I really appreciate that. And Stalker over Tree of Life or Brief Encounter, I would have thought that Stalker wouldn't have won that one because it's such a weird Russian film.
That's honestly what I would have voted for.
Stalker?
Yeah, there were 3 solid picks. I mean, you guys always make it difficult in those polls, but I kind of felt, especially with the subject matter of tonight's episode, Stalker kind of seemed like the best place to go.
Oh, right, that's true. It is very thematically correct. But I will also say you just lost some money for voting for Stalker because I'm not going to pay you anymore.
I'm a very poor businessman.
Yeah.
Anyways, if you want to check out our polls and help us pick our next Criterion film or send us questions to answer on the show about the films that we'll be reviewing, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Casual Cinecast. If you want to send us your questions directly, not on social media, you can always email us at casualcinemedia@gmail.com. And of course, as always, if you like the show, you want to help more people find the show, go onto iTunes, give us a 5-star review, let us know what you think of the show. Thank you.
Much appreciated.
All right. Are you guys ready to move into what's on our minds?
I sure am.
Let's go.
You on the mark!
Okay, Myke, since you are the guest of honor on this episode, we'll let you go first with what's on your mind.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's tricky. I've been so busy lately. Basically, all I get out to see is what Cinemusts requires of me. So, just got off my mind. We just dropped an episode this week on To Kill a Mockingbird and the life of Emile Zola, two really good courtroom drama movies about social injustice that we recommend. I won't spoil how we voted on them on the show itself. We'll leave that to listeners to decide. But those are kind of what I've just gotten over. What's on my mind right now kind of goes in line with what we're talking about tonight and is also getting me prepped for our next Cinemust episode. This week I revisited Alfonso Cuarón's Gravity for the first time in a couple years, actually, and I really love that movie. For a while I felt like it was maybe my favorite movie of the decade. This viewing I was finally able to kind of pull like the rose-colored glasses down a little bit more on my nose. I'm a lot more willing to live with its shortcomings, of which there are many, but overall I still find the movie incredibly affecting, beautiful to look at, beautiful to listen to. I guess I don't want to go in too much since I have to talk about it in a week and a half on our next show, but I don't know, what do you guys think of Gravity?
Well, to be honest, I have not seen it since I saw it in theaters. So I have only seen it the one time, but I remember really, really liking it, and I think because of all of the talk of the shortcomings of it, and I guess I had a lot of people on different social media feeds talking about the negative aspects of it, I started to think that maybe I was mistaken and maybe I was just enamored by the 3D IMAX because I went and saw it in a real IMAX, right? And I was enamored by the spectacle, and it's not as good of a film as I thought it was. But hearing your opinion of it, I respect your opinion, so maybe it's actually good.
You might not be too far off base because there are a lot of things about it that drag it down. And I even noticed I've got a pretty big TV, but even on a big screen, it still just doesn't compare with that feeling to like that IMAX 3D because that's how I saw it as well. And that definitely has a very magical, hypnotic pull on that movie's legacy. I still think it holds up. I still think it's worth a revisit, but I very much respect people who still think it's probably overrated and has kind of faded from the limelight for a reason. What do you think of it, Chris?
I think that's the reason I haven't revisited is what you just said, because it was so great in the IMAX and in 3D, and I just feel like my experience watching it at home won't be as good. But yeah, when I saw it, I loved it. I think even if there's shortcomings, I think technically it's a really great film. Like even if the story perhaps isn't as good or the story beats of it, technically I think it's a marvel.
Yeah.
I guess I want to ask this question, although I think I know the answer, but I have a same sort of phenomenon with Avatar. I only saw it once in theaters with like the 3D, and it looked really awesome and was this great spectacle. And of course, I think most people acknowledge now that Avatar is not very good. I'm just wondering if how it compares with that sort of spectacle. Like, I think Gravity is probably better.
I really like Avatar.
Okay.
Because I don't know. I kind of missed the whole Avatar hype train. I didn't see it when it was in theaters, so I've kind of only seen it on home video a while after it was the biggest thing in the world. So my entry point into it was when people started to turn on it. So I've never had to deal with like the backlash because I never thought it was like the greatest thing. But I still think Avatar is a ton of fun, like a movie that's well worth seeing. Gravity, I think, is probably a much more emotionally fulfilling and even visually fulfilling movie. So in that sense, yeah, I would say it's probably still a better, but I wouldn't turn our backs on Avatar so easily. I think there's a lot there to like.
Yeah, Chris, have you seen Avatar?
Oh yeah, I saw it actually with you. On the big screen in 3D. We drove an hour to go see it on the big screen like that. Yeah, I really liked it at the time, and once again, it's a lot like Gravity. I think technically it's a marvel. Story-wise, it's Dance with the Wolves, right? So yeah, it's kind of gone away. I'm really interested in seeing what the sequels are like if they ever actually come out. But that is the thing I'm looking forward to, is seeing what happens there.
Yeah. Was Gravity the last film that Cuarón did before Roma? Did he do something in between?
Yeah, no, he has big gaps, I found out. So yeah, and the movie he did before Gravity was Children of Men, which was like 2006. So
Right.
he always has really big gaps, but it was the last movie he did before Roma.
Yeah, it's such an interesting, I guess, juxtaposition of those two films next to each other in his filmography.
Yeah. And you know, this is the last thing I'll say because I don't want to say all this stuff and then I have nothing for when I do it on my show. But, you know, I think I remember Gravity getting crapped on a lot because it was so slight. Like, it does have a lot of screenplay problems and it seemed to deviate from things Cuarón did so well in things like Children of Men or Y Tu Mama Tambien that were very emotional and character-driven. And people were really upset about that. But I think there's a lot to like in Gravity because aren't those the types of filmmakers we would rather see make these big spectacle movies? Like, even through that lens, if the story isn't so good, it's head and shoulders above like your average special effects extravaganza. Like, you see where all the money is going and where all the heart is. And I think Gravity's actually helped by the fact that Roma just won him his second Best Director Oscar because now he's won a Best Directing Oscar for the movie he quote unquote should have. And I think that kind of takes a little bit of the bitterness away from Gravity now that it's a part of that victory and not like the only one he ever won.
Makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Man, you're making me want to revisit it now. I have to think about this.
Well, you totally should because we're going to drop an episode on it on May 7th, and then we're of course going to throw out to the audience to decide if it's going to make the list of must-see movies. So yeah, you guys should definitely check it out. I recommend it.
And just real quick, what's the other movie that's going to be part of it?
We're going to be doing it with The Revenant.
Oh.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah, survival in the extreme.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I just recently watched The Revenant for the first time, and so I need to rewatch Gravity, so both are like fresh, and I'm voting like having seen both movies recently.
I'm very excited for it. I think it's one of our most interesting pairings that we've done on the show.
And you also got the two directors that are part of the Big Five from Mexico.
Yep, visually stunning movies. Yeah, they have a lot of things in common, so I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, and Lubeski shot both of them, right?
Yep.
Another connection. Awesome. Well, I look forward to that episode.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is that it for what's on your mind, Mike?
That is it. I think I've gone on way too long about Gravity. What's on your mind, Chris?
Well, so what's on my mind is I live down in Texas, in Houston, and there's a Alamo Drafthouse near me. And this weekend they did what they call the movie Hullabaloo. And it's really fun. This is my first time to go. But what it is essentially it's a movie marathon or festival or whatever you want to call it. And they pick 5 movies. They have 4 people that pick 5 movies. The twist here is that when you go to the theater, you have no idea what the 5 movies are going to be. So you can get all sorts of weird movies in there, and it was a lot of fun. The suspense of not knowing the films was fun. And it was only like $25 for 5 movies, so well worth it. And yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the movies I got to watch. It turned out that I hadn't seen any of the 5 movies, so that was really good. And the first one was actually Empire of the Sun. With little Christian Bale in there. Actually, I thought Christian Bale was an adult when he made this movie. He just made his body look like a child. Yeah. And it actually also had John Malkovich in it, and then Ben Stiller was in there for brief moments. Yeah, this was our first movie that we watched, which is actually pretty good because it's a pretty depressing movie. And I liked it. It was my first time to see it. It was really good. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Have you guys both seen it?
I have.
I have not.
Oh, okay. It's worth it. Yeah.
I'm going to lose a lot of credibility here. That is my least favorite Spielberg movie. I think he's made much worse movies, but I think it is just so boring and atrocious and has such an unsympathetic character that I would like much rather endure like the bad kind of fun of like the Lost World Jurassic Park or Hook or like his section of the Twilight Zone movie. I can't stand Empire of the Sun.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I can understand that. I like went online and saw a lot of reactions not unlike yours. I think that there are sequences in this that are really, really good. You're right about Christian Bale being unlikable. I wish we could dive more into that, but let me move on to my next one.
Just personal opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the second movie was Champion, which was a South Korean film starring, I'm going to try to pronounce his name, Dong-suk Ma, who was in the Train to Busan, and then he's going to be in the new movie The Eternals for Marvel. This is a really fun movie about arm wrestling. It's about a South Korean American that goes back to South Korea to do some arm wrestling championship. Really fun. It's got the cutest 2 kids. It's a perfect palate cleanser to, the Empire of the Sun, this depressing movie. So then the third film is the yet-to-be-released Art of Self-Defense with Jesse Eisenberg in it. And this is actually my favorite film of the movie Hullabaloo. I think it comes out July 12th, July sometime. But this is really great. It's about a guy that gets mugged and decides to take karate to be able to defend himself. And it's kind of a take on maybe toxic masculinity, but it's really, really funny. I recommend watching it as soon as you can, and I think we'll probably talk about it more on the show later, too. The fourth film, and the strangest film, was a Canadian children's film that we watched. It was called The Peanut Butter Solution, and this is one of the weirdest films I've ever seen, especially considering that it's a child's film. And I don't want to give away anything, like why it's the weirdest thing, because part of the joy of watching this film is the surprise of the weirdness of it. So I just recommend you go see it. It was cool to see it in an audience of people that are also, they're just buying into it. They're having a good time. It's kind of like one of those midnight showings. Like you go to the midnight showing of The Room or something like that. It'd be perfect for a midnight showing. But it was really great. And then the last one was The Death of Dick Long, which is also a movie that hasn't been released yet. And I don't think it's ever going to get a release because it's a strange film. It starts off about 3 guys that are like in a band, and they cover a lot of Nickelback songs. And they get crazy after one of their rehearsals. And one of them ends up dead. And so the first half of this movie is basically them trying to cover up the death of one of their friends. And then this movie takes a turn, and it goes somewhere where I did not see it going whatsoever. Completely surprising. Yeah, it was good, but interesting. I can't ruin that surprise either. So I just hope that one day we can all watch this, and so I can talk about it.
I'm
funny?
intrigued.
The beginning part was funny, and then all of a sudden the twist happens, and it gets a little bit more serious, and I'm just a little bit more like, what is happening? What is this movie? All of a sudden this movie is completely different. Oh, and the thing I didn't tell you was it's also directed by one of the guys that directed Swiss Army Man. So it's kind of got that tone to it. Yeah, that darkness. So, yeah, I had a ton of fun doing this. 5 movies. I think this is the most movies I've seen in a row at a movie theater, but it was a lot of fun. The one thing I can't imagine doing, like when Sundance was happening and South by Southwest, I was following a bunch of people on the social medias, and they would see that many movies or more a day for like a week straight, and that seems crazy to me.
That's exhausting.
Yeah, I would like to try to do that someday, but it does seem very exhausting.
Yeah. How long did it take? Like, what time did it start, and what time did you leave the theater?
So I actually extended it. I also saw on my own Diane, which is a smaller film about an older lady that's taking care of a bunch of people in her life. So I started at 10 o'clock, and then we got out of there about 11:30. Maybe starting at 10 o'clock was a mistake on my part, but the movie Hullabaloo itself started at 1 o'clock, and then it ended about 11:30, 12.
Well, I'm jealous. I didn't get to go with you, even though you invited me.
Yeah.
So next time I'm going to try to go.
Absolutely. All right, so that is what is on my mind. Justin, what's on yours?
So what's on my mind this week is a TV show that's in the middle of its 2nd season, and I haven't been watching week to week since the 2nd season started, so I'm just now catching back up with all the episodes that are currently out, and that show is Barry, starring Bill.
Nice.
Yeah, so I know you have seen it, Chris, and you're up to date on it, but Myke, have you seen Barry at all?
I have not.
Are you familiar with like the concept of the show?
I'm actually not.
Okay, so perfect. I will tell you and the listener at the same time. Barry, it stars Bill Hader, and also has Henry Winkler in it and Stephen Root and several other people, but it's about an ex-Marine who's played by Bill Hader who has turned hitman, and he goes on a job in Los Angeles and stumbles into an acting class, an acting workshop that is taught by Henry Winkler. And he then gets the acting bug and decides he doesn't want to be a hitman anymore and wants to be an actor. And it's basically, from then on, it's him trying to get out of the hitman life, even though things keep trying to pull him back in, and focus on his acting in this acting workshop and try to make it as an actor in LA. That's basically the synopsis.
I'm sold. You actually had me like at the cast list. You didn't even have to do the plot summary.
Sure, yeah. It's got a fantastic cast, and all the people whose names you don't know are all really great too. Everybody is really, really good in it.
Mm-hmm.
But, we did a full episode review of the first season after it ended, because we all watched it. And I think I was kind of mostly positive on it, with some negatives that were keeping me from enjoying it. But I have to say, this season, and there are 4 episodes in so far, and if this season is like last season, there will only be 8 episodes. But these first 4 episodes, they've nullified a lot of the issues that I had with the first season and really stepped it up to me. And I'm really enjoying this season significantly more than the first one, and I like the first one.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm constantly surprised by Bill Hader in this, because knowing him from Saturday Night Live and stuff like that, Bill Hader is so good in this role. I'm just constantly amazed by him, right?
Sure, yeah. And what I was worried about was that the first season, the where it ends, and I won't go too much into that because obviously Myke hasn't seen any of it, and anybody who's listening might not have seen it, and I don't want to spoil anything. But where that season ends, I wondered how they would go other places from there. I guess I'm surprised by how much I don't feel like they're bending over backwards to continue the show. It all feels very organic, the plot and the way that things are unfolding and continuing. Right. Like it's all working really well for me, and it all feels very natural. And I really appreciate the writing in this season, and especially some of the character developments that we're going through and the things we're learning about other characters. And it's just fantastic. I can't recommend it enough.
Agreed. I can compare it to Breaking Bad a little bit. Like, it's got this darkness to it and it's kind of goofy and funny, but it's a fairly dark show. Like, when I went back to watch season 2, when I started up a couple of weeks ago, I had forgotten how dark the show actually is.
Yeah.
But it I don't know, it goes to these real places too. Like, there's a girl that Barry hangs out with, and she goes to dark places, or I don't know. It's all very interesting and very good. Hard to talk about in non-spoilers, but sure. I recommend it completely.
Yeah. It's still not as funny as I thought it was going to be, like, before I ever watched the first episode and just heard like the premise and seen the trailer. It's not super funny. It's just good with these moments that are kind of funny. Like, I never laugh out loud, I don't think. I just kind of smile to myself.
Yeah, the humor is more of to alleviate the stress, right? More so than the serious parts to alleviate the humor, Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. So have we sold you, Myke?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to check it out.
Even further, I know we sold you initially. But I just want to make sure we didn't lose you, I guess.
No, yeah, I'm signing up right now.
Well,
perfect. We'll have you back on when you finish.
Yeah. Also, wait till we get done recording, because I don't want you distracted, especially with
the don't
movie
go watch
we're
it
about
now.
to review.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought I could double duty, but okay.
Nah. Well, so that is it. That is on my mind this week. So unless anybody has anything else, are you guys ready to move into our review of High Life?
Yeah, before we dive into it, I wanted to ask you guys, were either of you as disappointed that the movie High Life didn't have any mention of marijuana in it? I went into it. It was 420 weekend. There's nobody smoked marijuana, or there's no marijuana. It's called High Life, guys.
I have a story about that. I think some people in my theater might have expected that.
I did catch like an Easter egg glimpse of Seth Rogen and James Franco kind of like floating away in the stars in one of the backgrounds of the shots.
Nice. I must have missed that. Yeah.
Claire Denis is a big fan of Pineapple Express.
Aren't we all?
We were scum. trash. Refuse that didn't fit into the system. Until someone had the bright idea of recycling us to serve science.
The odds are not in our favor. But when my work is accomplished, when perfection is achieved... Then what? Fly away?
All right, so as always, before we begin our review of High Life, just wanted to let you guys know that if you haven't seen the movie yet, you can keep listening. We're going to be speaking very generally. We're not going to be spoiling anything at first, just giving our overall general thoughts about the movie. And before we do spoil anything, we'll give you a warning and a spoiler alert. There'll be a little bumper that plays, and you can then pause the podcast, go watch High Life if you so choose to, and then come back, finish the episode. You're welcome.
Yeah, I also have to say I've seen this whole movie, and even if you spoiled me on it, I'm not sure that I would still completely understand what happened. But that's just
Thank you.
Yeah.
So maybe listen to the whole thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, so High Life is the new film from acclaimed director Claire Denis. It stars Robert Pattinson, Juliette Binoche, Andre Benjamin, Mia Goth, and Jesse Ross. And the IMDb synopsis says, a father and his daughter struggle to survive in deep space where they live in isolation. So it's pretty sparse. There's a lot of different directions that can go, and I would dare say this movie sure goes in about all of them.
Yeah. Does not tell the whole story of the movie at all. Like, you have not been spoiled on the things that happen in the movie by hearing that synopsis. Trust me.
Yeah.
All right. So who wants to go first with their thoughts? Myke, you went first for what's on our mind, but you're more than welcome to go first again if you'd like.
Ooh, I'm gonna follow you guys into the fray on this one.
Okay. Chris, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I've been looking forward to this film for a while, you know, even though I haven't seen any of Claire Denis' past films, which is something that I need to correct, for sure, sooner rather than later. Coming out of the festivals, a lot about what I heard about this film was about a particular box, fuck box, that is, and I really think that that's a shame, because I think that there's a lot more to this film than just the fuck box. But what I will say is this is a well-made film that you don't necessarily walk out of the theater knowing 100% about how you feel about this film, like when you immediately walk out. You know, the first thing that I wanted to do when I walked out of the theater, I was like, I can't wait to talk to Justin and Myke about this, because I really think it's imperative that you talk about this movie afterwards. And yeah, so that's what I'm excited to do. I think that Robert Pattinson is really good in this film, and I admire his career path post-Twilight. For Robert Pattinson to win me over after Twilight is pretty remarkable too, and I think he's a really great actor and that chooses really great directors too. Yeah, so I don't really have anything else to say right now. I can't wait to talk about it, is essentially what I want. And so, Justin, what did you think?
Well, I'm not too far away from you, at least in terms of I couldn't wait to talk about this film. I think that's the main thing that you get when you walk out of the theater is like just thinking about it, wanting to talk about it, wanting to read more about it, maybe even wanting to watch it again. I know that I pretty much felt like if there was another screening immediately after the screening I had attended, I probably would have turned around and gone and seen the film again. But unfortunately, I saw it as like the last screening of the day, so I couldn't do that. As far as Claire Denis goes, I have seen White Material, which that's the only film of hers that I've seen. But that one I was kind of iffy on. It didn't really inspire me to go immediately and seek out more of her work, whereas after seeing High Life, I'm much more interested in going back and watching some of her stuff. I really liked this movie, even if I don't 100% understand everything or know that I get everything after one viewing. I found the film very engaging and interesting the whole way through. Like, I never really knew what was going to happen next, and it kind of felt like anything could happen next at any point. And I've basically been thinking about it ever since I walked out of the theater. I haven't stopped, and I didn't even want to watch any other films between walking out of the theater and having this conversation, because I didn't want like anything to get in the way, and I didn't really want to think about anything else and have my mind diluted from it. I think the film has so much to say, and there are so many themes in it. I guess it could run into a problem, and I would totally understand if someone had this thought that it feels kind of scatterbrained and not very focused. But I think that it dips into every theme and everything that it's trying to say, or at least the things that I got out of it on one viewing. I think it dips into them just enough to get me thinking about them and to start asking questions. And I think that's ultimately what it's trying to do, as opposed to give me a definitive answer on a lot of things. So I didn't feel it was very scatterbrained despite trying to cover a lot. I thought it covered a lot of things very, very well. Like you said, Chris, the performances are all really good. Robert Pattinson is great. Juliette Binoche is really fantastic in this. She's
right, yeah,
like crazy, kind of like scary at times, but also like exudes sort of like a sexuality that is like intentional. I don't know. It just seems like she's intentionally being very seductive, but to be like that amount of seductive and scary all at the same time, to me, like it was really impressive, and I found fascinating to watch. Overall, I really, really like the movie. I can't wait to unpack it more, and I can't wait to watch it again. And the last thing that I want to say in general thoughts about it is, this is kind of the way that I wanted to feel last year when I saw Annihilation, and after I had heard about Annihilation. And so to me, this film kind of feels like this year's Annihilation, except I think it's actually good. And I think it's interesting from start to finish, unlike Annihilation, which lost me about 2/3 of the way through. So just as a comparison there. So yeah, that's it for me. Myke, your turn. You have to go now.
Sorry, I was just watching Barry.
Damn it. We said no.
So one thing I'm really grateful for in High Life is that I was gonna see it just last night, and I actually made a decision to go see it earlier in the weekend instead. And I'm very grateful for that, because I think the more time you can kind of get away from the movie to think about it, the better it gets. Because like you said, I think I walked out of the theater, Justin, and just felt it was so scattered and unfocused and kind of unpleasant in a lot of ways. So I had a pretty negative reaction when I first got off of it, but kind of the more time that's gone by and I've started to think about its relationship to other science fiction movies and all these different things it's trying to say, I find a lot more of it more focused than I think meets the eye. That there is, like you said, if it's all over the place, there is at least kind of a confidence in the craftsmanship, and you can feel that Claire Denis has a good mastery of the kind of movie she wants to make. I think it's a movie overall that I enjoy. Right now, I'm kind of struggling with the idea of wanting to watch it again, because I did still find a lot of it fairly unpleasant and cold. I'm hearing it talked about as a fairly warm science fiction movie, and that's kind of eluding me. I still feel it is kind of distant and nasty in some ways, and in some ways that's a good thing, and in other ways it doesn't quite speak to me. But I've definitely liked the movie a lot more in the days since I've seen it, and so I think this is going to be a really good discussion that's probably going to win me a lot more over to the movie side.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think if you haven't seen the film yet and you're listening to this, like a fair warning, we've all kind of touched on a lot of unpleasantness, but there is some very graphic violence and like super graphic sexual content, which is kind of some of the film's legacy, or the things that I had heard about the film going in, even though I knew nothing about the plot and I hadn't seen a trailer or anything. That was just, I knew there's some shocking stuff in it, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So kind of a funny story. I think another part of the reason I kind of have a complicated relationship to the movie is that plot synopsis we read is about a father and a daughter struggling to survive in space, and the movie very quickly moves well past that and goes into some much weirder territory. So when I went earlier in the weekend, I asked my wife if she wanted to go. We could go up into the city, see it, have a good time. And she's like, yeah, that sounds like a cool movie, interesting ideas. And you can imagine what kind of a date night movie this is once you get about 45 minutes into it.
That kind of goes with my story a little bit. So I counted right before the movie started, there was me and 9 other people, so 10 people in the theater. And the last ones that came in were a family of 4. And it would look like a mom, a dad, and probably a 17 and 18-year-old boy and girl, like brother and sister probably. And they left about 10 minutes into the movie, it was the point where Robert Pattinson was shaving at the beginning, and nothing crazy had even happened yet. By the time other stuff started happening, I was like, man, those people left before anything like that I would think would send someone as a walkout. So I think that there were some people, much like you jokingly, I think, said earlier, Chris, was that some people might have expected something different from a movie called High Life on the 420 weekend.
Yeah.
Man, it drives me nuts when people don't see in the MPAA box that there's graphic shaving scenes. Like, just do your research, people.
Yeah, for sure. I know there's not a ton to talk about that I wouldn't really consider a spoiler for this film, but does anybody have anything specific they want to go over?
Well, I mean, once again, to go back to Robert Pattinson, one of the things I kind of left out, and you're right, I wish I had said something about Juliette Binoche. She's really great in this too. But the beginning part where Robert Pattinson is having to deal with his baby, he's basically having to improv against this baby. I thought that was really amazing and really well done. I think that takes a certain level of skill, right, to act opposite a baby, right? I don't know how you guys feel about that, but that was pretty impressive to me.
Yeah, that was my favorite part of the movie. I was very on board for like that first 15 minutes, and yeah, it was kind of funny because for a little bit I wasn't even like, my dumb brain wasn't registering that that's Robert Pattinson improvising. I was kind of more like, man, this baby can act.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I felt too. I was like, man, the baby's hitting all its cues.
One thing I think I wanted to talk about is I'm curious how you guys felt about the set design, because it kind of walked a very thin line with me between being minimal and being low budget looking.
Yeah.
What did you guys think about the design of like the spaceship, and did it bother you at all?
I feel it. I've got an interesting take because I watched this like hand in hand with Gravity, which is such, an awe-inspiring, epic, big budget science fiction movie. And so I am with you that I kind of battle between like, is this all budget? Is this on purpose? I think overall I enjoyed the design just for bringing something new to science fiction, that, this spaceship is essentially just a block floating through space. And, you never see things like that in science fiction. Everything is usually pretty sleek and aerodynamic. And so I think I appreciated that this was something different. But there's that part in the back of my mind that is also like kind of slightly annoyed at that everything has to be like, this isn't like this type of science fiction you're used to. But sure. Overall I would go, I admire them experimenting and trying something new versus like, hey, it's another sleek white spaceship.
What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I think I'm right there with him. I liked the design of it, or it looks like a file cabinet essentially, Yeah, I think a lot of the set design, I feel like there may have been reasons for, but I don't want to get into it because I think it's a little spoilery. So we'll wait till we get to that. Yeah,
I think it just took me a second to get adjusted to it because it kind of has this almost retro vibe, like this sort of like 70s space movie vibe. Mm-hmm. And there's no arguing that it doesn't leave the film feeling very unique for modern sci-fi, and so for that I do like it.
It is a lot talking about Tarkovsky and soccer. I think there's a lot of Solaris in the design of the spaceship in this movie.
Yeah, I was reminded of Solaris as I was watching this. We talk about the coldness of the sets too. I think a lot of the sets feel very cold, but in juxtaposition to that, I really enjoyed how the garden felt very warm and earthy, and like there's a scene where a character takes off his shoes and socks and just rubs his feet in the dirt. Like this is their escape, I believe, to a certain extent. So yeah, that was a well done set.
Yeah, I really appreciated that. As much of the movie as I find really unpleasant and cold and kind of nasty, like I do have to acknowledge it's for a purpose, so that link back to the Earth can be like a very refreshing moment, because I agree with you, Chris, all those moments where they're hanging out in that garden is such a relief every time.
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody have anything else before we start to head into spoilers?
I don't think so. I think spoilers is a good idea now.
Yeah, difficult to go much further. Except maybe to say that I think this is an overall recommendation to people if they're kind of on the fence. Especially for science fiction fans, it sounds like this is kind of a unique new entry in the genre. I think Claire Denis kind of takes issue with that. She doesn't like categorizing it as a sci-fi movie, but let's call a spade a spade. That's definitely what it's doing. It has big ideas. It takes a bit of decoding, but I think it's well worth seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And going off that for our recommendations, I wanted to borrow a little bit from your show, Cinemusts, if we can, if that's okay with you.
Oh, do go on.
Well, what you guys do on the show, you pick for your films, you each vote Cinemust, Cinetrust, or Cinebust. Must being everyone must see it, trust being it's going to be great for a select few people, and bust meaning it's bad. So I think we should all vote on this film right now, whether it's a Cinemust, trust, or bust. What do you guys think?
Ooh.
Let's
Sure.
do this.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Well, Myke, you kind of just recommended it, but go ahead and give us your must, trust, or bust.
Sure, yeah, I've got some practice at this. For me, High Life would be an easy Cinetrust. This isn't a movie I would recommend to everybody, both in terms of content, as you said, there's some rough graphic sexuality, some violence in this that make it a hard sell. And usually I can overcome that if I have a strong enough connection to the rest of the material. I don't quite, but kind of like I just teased, this is definitely a movie for diehard science fiction fans, people who like very challenging movies that don't make sense when you walk out, that you have to think about and talk about for days on end afterwards. Like, this perfectly fits that mold. I know that that's the type of movie that a ton of people are looking for. So not for everybody, but definitely those folks.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on the Cinetrust. I think this is a really fantastic movie, and I think it'll either get more or less fantastic based on our spoiler discussion. But right now, I'm really, really liking it. It's probably my favorite film I've seen so far this year. But that said, I wouldn't recommend it to my mom. I wouldn't recommend it to my dad, or probably wouldn't recommend it to my fiance and lots of my friends. I wouldn't recommend it to. Only very, very few. I would recommend it to both of you guys, of course. So it has to be a Cinetrust, I think. No way it's a Cinemust.
Yeah, I don't think I can say it any better than you guys just did. I really enjoyed the film, and I think that there's more that we're going to get out of it here in just a little bit. But, yeah, for sure a Cinetrust. Yeah.
Not bad.
All right. Confidently a Cinetrust. Well done, everybody.
Yeah. This is the definition of Cinetrust.
Right.
Yes, very much agreed.
Cool. All right. Well, if that is all, then let's move into spoilers. What do you guys say?
Beam me up, Justin.
No, I guess Rosebud is just a piece in a jigsaw puzzle.
I'll tell you what, you know them cigarettes you got up there, I'll tell you all about it. And here we go.
He stole that line right from the movie. I remember when Juliette Binoche said that right before she walked into the fuck box.
Did she? She looked directly at you.
Yeah. Beam me up.
Turns to camera. We're in spoilers now. Right after she puts the condom on the dildo thing, she just looks to camera. Beam me up. Justin. She even said my name. That's really weird.
Yeah. Well, that does it.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for listening. No. All right. So who wants to start us out with spoilers?
Well, I guess if we're all kind of giving this the unofficial Cinetrust, it's not a movie for everybody, but we're recommending it to diehard science fiction fans. I think a big part of what informs that vote, at least for me, is that it is a movie with a lot of ideas, a lot of things that it hypothesizes about humanity. So with movies like this, I kind of like to wait around on what we think some of those big ideas are, if you guys are cool with it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the first thing on my list to talk about in spoilers too. So we're on the same page.
So what are like the big ideas that you think this movie is addressing?
So all of the people that are in this movie that are on the ship have committed some crime or criminals of some kind, and they, instead of being in prison on Earth, they decide to go on the ship and be in prison on a ship. So a lot of the sets to me reminded me of prison. Even the big box, the way it looks like a prison.
Right. The beds, yeah, they're all kind of bunked up together.
Routine,
absolutely. So I guess I don't know exactly what she's trying to say about the prison system. Is she saying something? I guess, what do you guys think she's saying about prison and life in prison and recycling people, like they talk about in the movie?
I'm kind of on the same thread as you, that I feel there is something that they're saying about the incarceration system. This is one I haven't quite followed to the conclusion, because I think this is a very interesting idea that people have volunteered basically their lives to the science experiment in exchange for not being given the death penalty, because I think that's something they also mention, is that they're all on death row, and this is kind of their alternative, is to be guinea pigs. Did I read that right?
I wasn't sure that they were all on death row. Some of them were.
Yeah, I think they all had life sentences.
Okay.
They were all in prison for life, was my understanding. I'm not sure how many were on death row. I know some were in there for murder, but they were at least all like, it was life in prison or this.
Yeah, but I think that's an interesting idea. I think it's Andre Benjamin's character who says something like, better up here, like at least I'm kind of giving something back. I'm not just rotting in a cell. I'm contributing to this experiment to find perpetual energy. I'm trying to, salvage my name. I think that's a pretty interesting idea. I think the idea is complicated for me by the subplot we have with Juliette Binoche's character, Dr. Dibbs, who is running this weird reproductive experiment to create like the perfect human being or something like that. And I don't know where to go with that, because parts of this movie that doesn't even feel like that is sanctioned by the people who sent them up here in the first place, that it's kind of something she's maybe kind of cobbled together, because I don't see how it ties in to what they're trying to do with all these other experiments.
Right. And one of the questions I had, I think, was, at first Juliette Binoche to me seemed like she was in charge. And maybe she was, but towards the middle of it, I come to discover that, she's committed crimes as well. So you're right. I don't know whether those were sanctioned. Actually, I thought they were sanctioned. I thought that's what she was supposed to be doing. But now that you bring that up, I'm not 100% that that's what she was supposed to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it has to be, because they have like the incubator on board. She didn't, she didn't cobble that together. We've seen what it looks like when you just throw something together. This movie opens with a really good shot of the baby in a makeshift playpen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's where I'm at, is it's somehow sanctioned for some reason, and that's probably why she was chosen to go. It seems like she has the medical know-how.
Right.
It's not totally explained in a way that makes perfect sense, as many things in this movie aren't. But that's what I inferred, I guess, is that was part of her mission.
So is humanity doomed? Like the relationship to Earth itself is another part of the movie I find really confusing, because I think we only really get like that professor who's being interviewed by a student on the train who's explaining kind of just the exposition about everyone up there is convicts and this is how the system works. But is Earth dying? There's a lot of talk about radiation, but is that from the ship? Is it on Earth? Like what is this obsession with creating a perfect human being and using like the refuse of society to do it?
Was it a perfect human being? I thought, like, so all the babies, because there were other babies, were dying from radiation poisoning. So was it just a baby that could withstand that radiation?
Yeah, and like survive space travel or whatever. I guess, radiation that the ship's putting off.
She does call it a perfect baby eventually, I think.
Yeah, well, I think she's even obsessed with it beforehand, if I'm remembering it. Like, she just... I don't know if it's a carryover of her guilt over killing her own kids, the reason she's up here. But it seemed to me that was trying to tie back to the doomed plight of humanity or something, that this voyage is meant to be kind of like the next evolutionary step, and creating this child that can survive space travel is like a key component to it, even more so than harnessing the energy of the black holes. But to me, there's not enough backstory about like, what that matters to the people left on Earth, because at times I'm like, it sounds like they're saying everybody on Earth is already dead, and at other times it seems like they're totally fine.
Right. So what I think that is about, I may be pulling this in from other sci-fi movies, and I shouldn't be, but I thought they mentioned something about like traveling through space, like the speed that they're traveling makes them on a different time relative to Earth. So it's a bit of that, like what they did in like Interstellar and other sci-fi films, where they're gone for seemingly 6 months, but it's been 25 years on Earth.
Sure.
So they talk at some point about like, especially with Andre Benjamin's character, that his wife and his kid are probably long gone.
Yeah,
and I think that's what they're referring to, more so than
sense.
Like a doomed planet. But I did think of it, that there is some reason that they're out there, and it goes in with what you brought up with the harnessing the black hole energy. This also goes back to like the whole asking what the movie's about and what Claire Denis is trying to say with it. I think there's so many things that are brought up in this film, and I don't know that she's trying to say something about every single one of them. I don't even know that she's trying to say something about any of them, to be honest. I think more what it is to get us asking questions about them and thinking about them. So, for example, with like the black hole crisis, like energy thing, what I was thinking of was the energy crisis on Earth, where we're talking weekly here. There's like new developments on like, are we, burning through our fossil fuels? What are we going to do for energy? Are we going to run out of oil? All of that stuff. And like, that's what I was thinking of like, maybe that's why they're going to try to harness this energy. Maybe they're out of fuel.
Yeah, I don't think that there's enough about Earth specifically to know, and maybe that's a problem like you were saying, Myke, but I don't think that they really cover that much about Earth, other than Earth has sent these people essentially, they've told them that they're going to come back, I believe, and they're sending them on a suicide mission, essentially.
Sure. And that's an interesting idea about, we've replaced guinea pigs with convicts.
Yeah.
We could definitely say this isn't necessarily a plot-driven movie, so I don't know that exposition about life on Earth matters all that much, because I think that this is much more fiercely focused on these characters and the interactions they have, and maybe the systems in which they exist. Because another thing I found kind of interesting, after I found it confusing at first, I found it interesting after a while, is how long it takes to figure out like what the pecking order on the ship is. I think it took me like a solid 2 days to realize that the guy who had the stroke is the captain and not one of the convicts. I probably should have figured it out sooner, because they had to take the tracker out of his finger. But yeah, there's not really a mention of like how this all works, and the way that they interact with each other is so sparse that it takes a long time to figure that out. So it's also a little confusing to me to figure out what questions this is supposed to raise about how society functions and why human beings need each other. I got like a lot more out of just the opening 10 minutes with Robert Pattinson kind of just doing due diligence on the ship and trying to care for his daughter. Like, I found that all a lot more emotionally impacting than these later sections where we kind of have this Stanford prison experiment kind of thing in space.
Yeah, I think the most emotional stuff, and the stuff that's most easy to attach yourself to, is the Robert Pattinson and the baby. And then, we come back to that later in the film where the baby's much older, and it's probably like 14, 15-year-old daughter. That stuff is where there's like a human emotion that you get from it. But I think everything else, like the rest of the time, I just spent thinking about themes. And real quick, if you guys don't mind, I'm just going to go through and list like every theme that came to mind.
Okay.
Ooh, please.
Some of which we've touched on, but I'll just name them again. But then we can go and like talk about any of them if you guys want. But I just kind of want to do this as a point of like all the questions and things that came up during the movie. And then I think the film's trying to make us think about all of these things rather than tell us one specific thing or say something specifically. It made me think about the prison system. It made me think about the morality of life sentences, the morality of experimentation on prisoners, how isolation from the world, even though they're in space, like you're also isolated in prison, and how that has an effect on people. I think it raises question about like single parenting and unwanted pregnancy from rape. It also kind of has some touches on like what lies out there in space. There's also the treatment of animals in experiments in here, and are prisoners viewed as animals? Because, later on they run into that ship, right? And like where it's like, it seems like the same ship as theirs, but it's full of dogs, and it's like dogs are being experimented on. So it's like prisoners and dogs are kind of on the same level. I also think there's something about Native Americans.
Interesting.
Because there's these images of Native Americans are the first ones we see on their little monitors with the baby. There's a bunch of them. One of them's like a Native American, like laying next to a campfire, like seems like he's distressed or crying. And then also like the energy crisis thing. Like I just think that there's so much going on, and I'm not sure that any of them, I have like a thing where she's trying to tell me something about any of these points at all. I just think she wants me to think about them.
Yeah. Let's talk about the dogs.
Okay.
And what exactly, and we actually have a question from Myke and Oscar, and they ask us to please explain the dog stuff. Movie really got me angry after the dog stuff. This from also Myke from Myke and Oscar. And what is she trying to say there too? And I think, there's a lot of stuff here. Is the isolation from Earth or being in prison turn them into animals, into dogs, right? Because a lot of them essentially become animals, especially the one guy that goes around raping or attempting to rape people, and they sort of treat each other in animalistic ways, I think.
Well, they also they get a treat essentially for going into the masturbation box and like providing their semen.
Wait, yeah, okay, let's talk about the dogs, then we can talk about the fuck box because but but yeah, so what do you guys think? Is that what the other dogs are for? Like because they're becoming animals, and also that we treat them on the same level as dogs. Is that why they're becoming animals? You know, like what do you guys think?
I think it's important too to mention like the very specific things with dogs that happen in the film or that are mentioned in the film. Number one being that Robert Pattinson's character, he's in jail for the murder of his friend, but he killed his friend because I believe his friend killed his dog.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I got.
He also, every time he has to report back to Earth so that they can extend like the life cycle for 24 hours and stay alive for another 24 hours, he always says time to feed the dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, in the end, they find a ship full of dogs that are being experimented on. And those are there any more?
I don't think so, but I think on the ship for sure mentioned that like a lot of the dogs are dead. It looks like by death from other dogs, you know?
Yeah.
I guess we don't necessarily know that. Maybe I just read that into it.
It's a similar, looks like a similar situation might have happened with them that happened on the one full of humans.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's an interesting idea going with this about masters as well that I don't think anybody on this crew feels too well taken care of. So I think that moment when we find the dog ship and Robert Pattinson is walking through the halls and he won't bring the one back, I think obviously that has connotations to his past over, you know, the death of a dog is what's kind of set his life on the course that's led it here. But I think there's also kind of like a sadness that there's nobody on that ship to take care of those dogs, just as there wasn't really anybody on the ship to take care of these prisoners who I think Chris kind of nailed it, are essentially treated as pets with, you know, they get treats, they get exercise, you know, everything is on routine, and they aren't really, there's not a lot of higher brain function going on this ship. They kind of fit the purposes that whoever's running these experiments want them to fulfill. So I think that there's also kind of like a sadness. You might even like extend it to like some kind of like religious connotation of like, well, who's looking out for me? Am I really just a mad dog run loose? Am I really only as good as like my base instincts of eat, kill, screw?
Sure.
I think it's an interesting idea though, because maybe this is where a little bit of backstory on Earth would have helped us out a little bit, because if we're supposed to be kind of decrying that they've become animals, we never really get to see them not being that. So these kind of acts are the only thing we know these characters for, right? Like the guy that gets killed because he's trying to rape the female prisoners, like he's just the rape guy. Like right. we don't know his name, we don't know anything about his past. Like that's just who he is. So I think maybe some stronger interactions, like maybe even some backstory can kind of help make that more tragic and less of like the status quo.
So let me ask you this. How does Robert Pattinson fit into that? Because he has abstained from a lot of those things. Like he abstains from the fuck box, like his base instincts. They call him the monk, for instance, because he's abstaining from these baser animalistic instincts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is he removed, or do we see redemption in Robert Pattinson because he does take care of the daughter and stuff like that?
Well, he and the character of is it Cherney that Andre Benjamin plays? I can't remember how to pronounce it because it's a Russian name, but they seem to be kind of like the only prisoners that are kind of making an effort to like see the big picture. Everybody else kind of just goes with the flow. At best, they just resist. You know, obviously with the character of Boys who refuses to be impregnated by Dibs, but you know, Robert Pattinson is kind of the only guy that we see make a conscious decision to decide to rise above that everybody else is kind of just going along with it because you got to go in the fuck box, you got to take the edge off, and Robert Pattinson is the only guy who I think he kind of gets a certain amount of self-satisfaction of being the monk, of being the only guy on board who kind of sees the big picture and wants to rise above just the prisoner status that he's been put on the ship for. He kind of wants to fulfill a higher calling, I think.
I guess we don't really get a lot of what the other criminals are on there for, other than Juliette Binoche. But his story of how he ends up there, I think you could argue that it is understandable and keeps him from, at least for as like an audience, like him seeming like a horrible person, and like or just like a dirty criminal, is justified, I guess, in being there in a sense. You know, maybe he carries that sort of like holier than thou attitude towards the other prisoners.
That's interesting. We do see a little bit of, you said her name earlier, the girl that refuses to be impregnated.
Boise?
Boise. Yeah, Boise or Boise.
Yeah. Mia Goth. She is on the train. We don't exactly even get what she did, but she's on a train with this other guy, and then the cops like crawl up the side of the train, and then she just flips him off. Am I remembering that correctly? Or did I just make all that up?
You might have. I'm honestly just having a hard time like placing faces. My memory is kind of just they're all in the train, and I didn't really draw the lines between their individual identities.
Okay, was that just them all on the? So what was the train? Were they all headed to the space stuff? Is that why they were on the train?
I read it as more they're kind of just drifting. You know, that's kind of the romantic image. You know, the hobos riding the rails in the Great Depression. So to me, it was kind of just like, well, you could be on a train and the cops will be after you, or you could be blasted off into space and be part of something important.
Okay.
Speaking of Andre Benjamin, I was a little confused on what happened to him. Did he kill himself?
He was a ghost the whole time.
Well, that explains that.
Yeah, no, I don't know that either. I think with how peaceful his departure is, that he lies down and then it just kind of like has a soft fade into him just kind of being buried underneath. I think he did commit suicide, but in a way that he was like okay with, that this was kind of like a willful submission, that he didn't want to keep going with all the nasty crap that's gone down. He would rather just be here with the warm, welcoming soil of the earth, and that's where he felt he belonged.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was sleeping down there for a while anyways, right? So eventually, for him to become one with the earth seems apt.
Yeah. And plus, think of, you know, the way everybody else has gone. You know, there's, you know, people have been bashed in the head or stabbed in the face or ripped apart by a black hole. I think, you know, that's a very nice image to just see him kind of lay down and yeah, just be where he belongs and feel connection back to Earth.
So actually, one of the other things I want to call out that I thought were really great, especially on the, we just got actual pictures of a black hole. I think these black holes looked really great. And the way they shot it, the one girl gets torn apart by the black hole. And I really thought that was done very well. And I really enjoyed the way they looked.
Yeah, it's kind of an homage to 2001 a little bit.
Yeah.
At least I got that with the way that the camera shakes, right? And it's kind of like this weird motion blur to it.
What actually happens when you go through the Stargate beyond Jupiter? No, yeah, it does look really good and very, very tense. Like I thought that was a really engaging scene.
Right. And one thing, I don't know if you guys noticed this, and I'm not sure if this is the only place that this happened in the movie, but whenever Mia Goth's character, you know, she kills the girl who is the pilot, who's actually supposed to be piloting the ship into the black hole, and she gets in the ship and goes down there. Well, we don't see that pilot girl dead until after she's gone through the black hole, from what I remember. But there's a shot of her laying on the floor, and it's kind of over her. But the aspect ratio changed for that shot. Or at least that's when I noticed that the aspect ratio of the film changed. It became closer to 4:3 Academy, like square aspect ratio.
I must have been more invested than I thought. I didn't notice this.
Well, I was very invested, and I kind of like snapped out for a second and noticed it, and I was like, how long has this been like this? Because I don't think the rest of the movie has been this way. And then it went back like in the very next shot. And I'm curious if that happens in other places, or is that the one place that happens? And I'm not sure why it happened. But I guess did you guys, either of you, Myke, you didn't notice it, but Chris?
No, it's a mystery.
I have not. I did not notice that. That's a reason, I guess, to go watch it again.
Yep. I'll be right back. Let's pause this.
I'll catch up on Barry.
All right.
Yeah, sorry to let you down, man.
Yeah, that's fine. It's just something I didn't notice if anybody else noticed, and I can't imagine that would be the only time if you're going to do something like that. But I don't know. It's weird. Just something to pay attention for next time, I guess. Also, just in other technical things, the gravity seems to be very weird and not what I'm used to seeing in a space film. Like when things fall, like in the opening scene when he's outside, he drops his tool and it almost falls as opposed to floats. And it's the same when he drops all the bodies out of the door. Is that due to the black hole?
So I've read in passing that it's simply tied to the fact that I think they mentioned the ship is traveling pretty close to the speed of light. I don't think they've quite reached the speed of light, but that is what creates the artificial gravity. I don't know how scientifically accurate that is. That's one thing that I've kind of given up with these kind of more deep science fiction movies, is they always seem to be competing with like who gets space travel right, like who actually is scientifically accurate. And to me, it's kind of one of the least interesting things about science fiction. So I stopped doing research into it. But that scene where he drops the bodies out of the airlock like threw me for a loop, because he kind of just opens the door and he just drops them. And we're so accustomed to, in a space movie, like as soon as you open a door, just everything gets sucked out. And so it took me a while to catch up on that.
I kind of chalked that up to the low budget of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Where they couldn't really, they could just kind of explain it away. She's not, you talked about Claire Denis not wanting to categorize this as a sci-fi movie. I don't think Claire Denis is very interested in the science of space travel. She's trying to tell a story about other things set in space, I think.
Sure.
I mean, that's kind of what I thought too. It almost seemed like I don't particularly care if I get this right. It doesn't really matter. What's important is that he's dropping the bodies out into space. It's not important that we have this action scene where they get sucked out or something, and it's not important that it's shocking or has any cool effect, which I admire.
Yeah. I'm still at loggerheads over, some of the black hole stuff seems to be like, I know they've consulted with astrophysicists on the movie, so like there is an effort for some kind of scientific fidelity, but I don't know like where the line is, so it confuses me. Why is she using that to tell that story? Like, why is it important that, we see him take like each individual body to drop off? Is it just so that we feel the weight of like every single individual life that's being abandoned, or is there some other point they're trying to make? It muddles the water for me, because I can't tell like to what end she is loyal to how science might actually be in that situation in some scenarios, and then ways in which it would not.
You're right. I did read that she consulted scientists about the black holes. So you made a good point about why would she consult about that, but not the gravity part.
Yeah, I guess it helps that I can't tell the difference when it's scientifically accurate and when it isn't, so it helps it not matter as much, I guess.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that was consulting for the logic of the story to make sense as opposed to the logic of the special effects. That's where she loses interest.
Yeah, I would buy that.
Yeah, I do like how the time shifts around a lot in this film, and sometimes it doesn't seem like there's a logic to the time jumps that we make. We start with Robert Pattinson and the baby, then we flash back to stuff on the spaceship, see how they got to that point where it's just him and the baby. But then when we come out of that, we're not back to him and the baby. We're all of a sudden to him and she's 14 or 15.
Yeah, I was really surprised it wasn't as confusing as it probably should have been. Like, I think it was pretty easy to figure out kind of where you stood in the timeline. She's really good at giving indicators through like the gray patch in Pattinson's hair, and obviously there's more people on the ship, so it must be the past. We've seen them getting dumped out the window. This gets it back in my nitpicky realm, but the pacing of the movie does bother me a little bit, kind of simply because I did sign up for this movie about a dad raising his young daughter alone in space, struggling to survive, and I'm so enthralled with those opening 15 minutes that have such promise. And then the movie spends an hour being like, here's how that baby got here and all the fucked up circumstances that surround it. I could do with 20 minutes less of all that and get back to the father and daughter, because the bookends are definitely where I get the most out of this movie. It's definitely the parts of the movie I'd most want to rewatch.
it's a hard sell to me to say that this is about them struggling to survive in deep space in isolation.
Yes.
I mean, even taking in those scenes, like what we got there was not about survival, really.
Yeah,
or like struggling.
A little bit up front, like fixing the panel on the exterior while you've got to kind of keep the baby occupied. It's a good dynamic and raises a lot of questions. It's an interesting scenario.
Yeah, that's fair, I guess. But I guess like they don't really go a lot into like the food or oxygen supply, that sort of thing.
Don't they kind of get into the food, because at the very beginning he's like talking about you don't drink your own piss and shit. It's taboo. And so I don't know whose piss and shit he was drinking, but were they recycling like excrement in order to eat it and drink it, was what I was taking from that.
I'm not sure. I did find it interesting and like really specific, this scene where he's teaching her the word taboo.
Yeah.
They called that out, and I was very worried in the last third of that movie, because as soon as he's like, that's taboo, we don't, and I was like, uh-oh, I felt like we had incest coming up, but fortunately they didn't go there. They went to a lot of other places, but the incest thing did not happen, and I was very worried about it.
Yeah, because he also says to her, break the laws of nature and you'll pay.
Mm-hmm.
Very unsettling line.
Yeah, I was like, that's ominous as fuck. What's coming? And I guess breaking the laws of nature is like, I mean, there's I guess a lot of things that could be referring to in the film.
Yeah.
But it feels like kind of one of those movie defining lines when it happened. I'm not sure it's as important as it seemed.
Right, yeah.
But it does feel all important because so much of the movie seems to be about taboo, especially about sexuality.
Yeah, which is, man, that's even a thing we haven't necessarily touched on. We touched on a little bit, but like, I don't know where to start. Like Juliette Binoche's character, you talked about it before, Justin, is so sexual. I mean, one of the things that didn't necessarily make sense to me was, other than consent, why did they necessarily, like, why couldn't two people pair up and have a baby naturally? Was she doing something specific? Or did she just need, what was she doing that made it so that she had to inseminate people as opposed to letting people naturally have babies?
So that kind of goes with the idea I was talking about earlier, that she seems obsessed with creating the perfect human being, because I think with the insemination, there's kind of a selection process that she can pair up embryos to find like the most viable candidates to implant. Like there does seem to be kind of like a Frankenstein-esque need to control, need to create the ideal human being, and you're just not going to get that if you just let these prisoners run amok and sleep around with whoever they want to.
And the other thing was the two people that she really couldn't get that product from was Robert Pattinson didn't join in the masturbation room, and the other girl refused to be inseminated and would find ways around it. And those are the two people that she eventually makes the perfect baby with.
Yep, the indomitable spirit.
Yeah.
Why do you think it is that we get such a long scene of Juliette Binoche's character in the fuck box? Like,
yeah,
because that is all pure pleasure for her, right?
Yeah,
and only for her.
I mean, they make a point of her putting the condom on.
Yeah, I was interested. At first, I thought that it was a way to inseminate, but obviously she's not trying to inseminate herself. Yeah, that is very interesting. And then the other thing is, like, both men and women can go in there. Like, it's, I don't know. I don't want to necessarily get into the details of the fuck box, but yeah. And then there's also that shot where, from behind her, where like there's this green monster, like that's kind of touching her back, and it looks like grass. So is there an earthiness to this box, or to having sex, or in that pleasure? Is there an earthiness to it? I guess would be what I was thinking. Another way to be connected to Earth. Because she also, I feel like if I remember correctly, she states that she doesn't orgasm.
She fooled me.
All right.
Yeah.
I think there's some element of desire fulfillment in the box that,
like virtual reality type
super
thing?
Unexplained. Yeah, maybe, or just some sort of whatever you're into exists in there. And I'm not sure that it's just all around like a gym. where it's just got all these machines hanging out, or if it's just kind of manifests different things for you.
Yeah, that seems to me imagined by her, and that, you know, the fur is kind of juxtaposed with kind of just the cold steel. You know, it's a very mechanical, cold looking environment, but as she kind of gets in it and we start to get like that wild, erratic movement and that pleasure out of it, that's when like this kind of softer fur monster, or grass monster, I guess is what Chris sees it as. That kind of seems like in her imagination that you can work yourself up to kind of what you crave most, and in this cold, harsh environment, what you crave most is something soft and warm that caresses you.
Makes sense.
Maybe that's also just a feature that comes with the deluxe model of the fuck box.
the furry hands and arms or something.
The GRX 310 model.
You can get it on Amazon for $59.99.
Links in the show notes. I'm wondering if we get the scene, how it seems like she is experiencing pleasure, even though she says she's not. Does that inform how we read the scene later where she rapes Robert Pattinson and has sex with him while he's like sedated? What did you guys think whenever she started doing that? Did that feel like her manipulating him for her pregnancy test, or did you think she was maybe actually into him and trying to have sex with him for pleasure?
It was for pleasure. I mean, there are other ways to to get what she needed.
Are there? I mean, there are, but could she do it? Because wasn't that the problem?
For one, there are apparatus for collection more efficient than her vagina.
Yeah, that's what I was. This is a tough conversation. This may be the toughest conversation we've ever.
No, I'm with Chris.
We did the episode on Salo, man. We're all right.
Oh, that's true.
No, I think Chris has got it. I think it's for her pleasure, because I think she really wants what she can't have, and he has played hard to get. He will not play her games. He won't give up his seed to her. So I think there's a bit of the thrill in getting it herself, so to speak.
And the way you say that, too, she very much reminds me of a witch. The way she walks down the hall, and you said, like, give up his seed to her. You know, very much like like, maybe not even a witch. What is it called? Not a nympho.
Succubus?
They're like, succubus, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, she seems, I guess, maybe more like a succubus. She wants to, you know, collect sperm, you know, so...
Right.
It's very interesting.
But she refers to herself as a witch at one point. She says, like, yeah, I look like a witch, or I seem like a witch to y'all.
Yeah. This movie, I don't know if you've seen Lars von Trier's Antichrist. It's a movie we've covered on Cinemusts. A lot of her performance it seemed like the performance is an Antichrist, which is also a lot more about this earthiness, kind of witchcraft angle, and taking pleasure in carnal knowledge and things like that. It reminded me a lot of that.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense.
In that it was also very unpleasant to watch.
Yeah, I think, I mean, films like Antichrist, and we mentioned Salo and stuff before, like, there are things that are unpleasant in this film, but I feel like those both are a level above this film, to be honest.
Yes. Agreed, yes.
So the last thing that I have to talk about is, of course, we haven't talked about the ending of the film yet. Does anybody have anything else before we move on to the ending?
Nope.
All right. So, of course, in the end, we're with Robert Pattinson and his daughter, who is now, I guess she's 14 or 15. That's about what I figure.
She's of age.
Long story short, they decide to climb into the ship and fly themselves down into the black hole, which is basically suicide. But they're not. I don't think that they totally can be 1,000% sure about that. Maybe like 99.9% sure. But what did you guys make of the ending? Did it mean anything to you guys? Or what did you get out of it, I guess?
To me, it almost means too much. I think for me, it's a little too open-ended, because the final lines where he reaches out to his daughter and says, "Shall we?" Suggests that they don't really know what's coming either, that it is a leap of faith, but, you know, as humankind, we have to move forward in the brink of discovery, and it's better than going backwards. But in terms of, you know, moving forwards to what, I don't know. And maybe that's because I don't have the proper emotional investment in these characters beforehand. But to me, I think it was a little too open-ended by half.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what to make of it. So they all get in their spacesuits, and then they take off towards the black hole. I actually found it kind of hopeful to me, to be honest. Like, I felt like we had been through a bunch of grim stuff, and finally, like, there's just like a glimmer of hope here. But so they're headed towards there, and then the very last shot, like you were talking about, they are no longer in their spacesuits. It's almost like a 2001 type thing. Like, they're standing in the blackness and they're talking to each other in the glow of the orange black hole. So, like, maybe they made it through, and I don't know. What do you think, Justin?
Right. Well, I'm agreeing with everything that you guys said in terms of interpretation. I think I like it a little bit more than Myke does. To me, it was the right amount of open-ended for me. What I think is worth noting is, and I saw this in the end credits, that it said, like, the final images are very similar to, or inspired to look like Contact, which is, I think references it as like an art installation. And I looked it up, and Contact is a short film by Claire Denis. Have either of you guys read about this?
No,
I've not.
Yeah, so essentially it's a short film. It's about 3 minutes and 15 seconds long, and it's basically a lot of the exact same images and shots that we get from that end segment, just kind of extended longer than they are in the film. And so I guess I read into the name Contact of the short film, and that she wanted to inspire those images and call them out in the credits that they were inspired by this short film Contact. And I don't think it's definitively saying that they're making contact with something else, but I think it's just suggesting that they are either going through the black hole and going to contact whatever's on the other side of it, or they've maybe potentially gone to the afterlife and are going to make contact with whatever's there. Ultimately, what I'm saying with that is that it left me feeling hopeful as opposed to down by the end when the movie was over. And even like when they're getting ready to fly out there was some element of hope. I felt that.
Agreed. I felt hope. Did you feel any hope in that, Myke?
A little, because we do have the nice warm orange light, which is starkly juxtaposed with all the gray and the blue that we've got. So yeah, a little bit. It is just more overshadowed by my confusion, which is my fault.
I don't know that it's your fault necessarily. Yeah.
No, man, I think it's a confusing movie that's intentionally not giving you a lot. It's showing you, honestly, I think it's showing you like a fifth of a puzzle and being like, here you go, Not like a puzzle in the sense that you don't know what's going on, but like a puzzle in the sense of like trying to see the big picture, the whole thing. Which I think it's going to work for some people, and some people it's not going to work, which is why we all labeled it a sin of trust in some ways. Yeah,
that was really a big one for me. If I was going to knock it down from a must to a trust, is that I'll be forthcoming. I don't have a great track record with these kind of open-ended, big question science fiction movies, but I like a lot of them. I've on our show we've covered Blade Runner and 2001, movies that I really love that I think everybody should see. But I do think that there is a limit to like the number of like big questions you can ask without addressing or answering, and I think that this movie probably does that a little bit too much. Like you said, I'd be okay with 2/5 of a puzzle, but 1/5 it kind of tips me over the edge, and I kind of fight back against it a little bit.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you there, especially about this film, because there are a lot of open-ended questions that don't get answered.
Yeah, I think where I will come down on this film rests a whole lot on how I feel on a second viewing. Like, it's a film that no matter what I give it, right? Like, if I were to give it a star rating of whatever, I would not feel very confident in that rating.
Yeah.
That's what I think. Like, and I think it could either go up dramatically or down dramatically on a second viewing. Like watching a movie again, it makes the good ones, better and the bad ones worse. And I think that's going to be maybe never truer than in this film.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's that.
Yeah. Does anybody have anything else? Any last things they want to say before we close off this highlight review?
As negative as I worry I have sounded about this, I'm very glad to have seen the movie. It's in a weird spot right now because I'm thinking way forward to at the end of the year when I'm going to do my top 10 list, and I'm really not sure if this is going to make the best list or the worst list. And I think that's an interesting conundrum, and I actually think a movie deserves a bit of credit for putting you in a spot like that.
I think that end of the day, it makes me ask a lot of questions and think about a lot of stuff, which is a staple of sci-fi and what a lot of the good sci-fi does. And whether or not I have like the right answers to that question, whether or not it gives me the answers or any like foothold, I think it's okay.
Yeah, I mean, a film that challenges you, I respect. But I do think Myke also has a good point that like, if we're not exactly sure what the themes are or what she's trying to say, there are maybe issues, you know.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess, where I finally fall on that.
All right. Well, that sounds like it does it for this episode.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. And of course, as always, thank you, Jake Wagner-Russell, for doing our intro and outro music. If you want to hear more of his music, you can do so at soundcloud.com/bobscotch. And then lastly, of course, thank you so much, Myke, for guesting on this episode and filling in for other Myke.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, it's been a really weird experience being able to actually react to you as opposed to just listen to the podcast.
And we also made things very easy on ourselves by finding a guest also named Myke.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a suspicion that was the real reason.
Yeah. You're all right. But your name, stellar.
Perfect.
All right. So one more time, just remind people where they can find you, Myke, or where they can find your show.
Sure. Just wherever you are, social media, Google, just search for Cinemusts. Again, it's spelled Cinemusts. We're always on the lookout for people who want to offer their takes on the movies that we're discussing and whether or not they deserve to be included on the list of absolute must-see movies. I think at the time this episode drops, we will have just released our episode on To Kill a Mockingbird and the Life of Emile Zola, so people can go to cinemusts.com to vote if they think either, both, or neither of those belong on the list of essential cinema. And just would love to get any new listeners, any new voters. It's always a fantastic time to hear what people think of these movies that have all this legacy behind them.
Go check out the show. It's really great. It's one of my favorite film podcasts, so definitely worth your time.
Agreed.
We have a particularly good episode on Singing in the Rain and the Artist.
Hey, I didn't want to say it, but if you're going to, I think it's a fantastic episode. Handsome sounding guest.
He was.
Dreamy. All right, so for our next episode, next week, we haven't quite decided what we're going to do yet. It's kind of a rough week for movies. Nobody's really talking about anything that's coming out this week. Social media is not a buzz with, Avengers Endgame is coming out next week. I think that's probably what we're going to be doing. So look forward to that. And then I think in the next 2 weeks we'll be doing the Stalker episode, which I think maybe the same length as the Avengers movie. So
yeah,
they're both really long.
We have our work cut out for us.
Yeah.
All right, again, if you want to ask us questions to answer on the show about Avengers Endgame or Stalker, you can send those to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at casualcinecast. You can also email those to us at casualcinemedia@gmail.com.
Thanks so much for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.